Super. Well, good evening, team, and thank you again for joining me tonight. Tonight, we are talking about trigger stacking and the bucket theory. Two really important theories to understand when our dogs are having reactions and dramatic moments in the world that we see as big explosive energies, or moments in time where we can't communicate with them and we think, oh, crikey, what's going on here? And these are two really lovely explanations for that. And I'm going to throw a third in for free as well, to hopefully give you guys a really nice understanding of what's going on in your dog's world, but also some really lovely terminology to use, particularly with partners or people that also walk your dog. We found it a very helpful thing for you guys to have words like, oh, their bucket's full, because everybody goes, I know what that means. And then they can act accordingly. And it's just a really lovely thing to have for everybody. So today, first we're going to start out with is trigger stacking. Trigger stacking is something that quite a lot of people have come to me and they've kind of heard about already. A lot of dog trainers talk about trigger stacking. And so people who might have already had contact with other trainers kind of already have this as a piece of knowledge, but perhaps don't have it all the way through, I guess. So we've touched on before a trigger. A trigger is essentially a thing that is in the environment, that is in your dog's world, that makes them want to react to, and react in the sense of, I've seen it, I need to do a thing, and it doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. They're going to react to it and have a moment of interaction. Ideally, that's what they're looking for, a moment of interaction with it, or a big explosive energy moment. So common triggers that people talk about are usually negative things that are triggers. So it's usually the dog that's barked at another dog. They would find the dog would be the trigger. Or a person, they're barking at the person. Perhaps it's the postman that's come to the door and knocked on, and they've had that moment of shouting at the postman. That would be the trigger. The postman knocking on was the trigger for that behavior that we saw afterwards. And it's very common for trigger stacking in particular to be used in a negative sense towards the dog who's struggling with the world. But actually, we also need to remember that triggers are things that can promote a positive or an excited response in our dogs as well, right? So think here about maybe our teenage dogs who have excited responses to the other dog in the street. They go, oh, there's a doggy over there, and they really want to get themselves involved. And again, we see this quite big moment of energy coming out of these guys. Sometimes we call them frustrated greeters. You might have heard that term, where a dog is on the lead and they're shouting at another dog, and it's less of a, oh my God, I'm terrified, I need to keep you away shout. It's more of a, I need to come and say hello shout, and I'm getting really annoyed that I can't go do that right now. And that is, again, it's a big explosive moment of energy in that dog's body. So they've reacted to that trigger. It means in this sense, it was positive, right? And so we need to remember both these things. Trigger stacking in our dogs is where the dog goes out in the world, and we'll give it an example as we're going through. Perhaps they go out in the world and they go past a thing that we would call their trigger. They're a dog or a person or a ball or a bird or insert object thing here, right? They go past that thing and they might have kind of like a low level response to it. They might have a triggered response to it, right? But they do all right with it. And then they go past another one and they do all right with that. And then they go past another one and they do all right with that. But when they go past that final one, they have this humongous outburst. And you think, oh my God, what just happened? You've done so well with the other ones. Like, what on earth just happened there, right? And what's happened there is that this is like the stacking, I guess. And this is where the explosive energy happens when we reach up here. What's happened is they've gone out and they've dealt with one dog. And then they've dealt with the second one. And then they've dealt with the third one, and all the time they've stayed below that big explosive energy, but it's been creeping up towards it. So every time they go past something that makes them have an emotional response to it, and a moment to it, I guess, they've had that internally and maybe not had that big display of energy until they get them all stacked on top of each other. And then they go, I can't handle it anymore. Here's the big energy outburst. Okay. They've had a similar emotional response to all of these things. It's just that they managed themselves better at this level. But when they got up here, they had that explosive energy. We can put this into human world really easily. And I find that when I do this, sometimes people go, yeah, because we can kind of go, I've done this actually, and I've done this quite a lot. So you get up, maybe you either didn't sleep well, or your alarm went off dodgy, or you snoozed it one too many times. So we already have like a baseline of I'm not doing great when I've got up, right? And then you know what, maybe you didn't have your normal breakfast in, and then maybe you couldn't find your shoes, and then maybe you got stuck in extra traffic and there was some extra dickheads on the road that day. You know what I mean? You go to work and you're working with the person that you had a bit of an argument with, or maybe they don't wash their bloody coffee cup after they've finished it and they just leave it in the sink for you because it's annoying, isn't it? It's not really big, but it's really annoying, right? And then you come home from work and you get stuck in traffic again, and then you get in and you think, oh, I've got a cup of tea, but I forgot to buy the burgers on the way home from it, and I've got to go back out to Tesco's. And then you go in, right? And then the last thing that happens is your partner leaves their shoes in the middle of the floor, and you go mental. You go absolutely skits at these shoes that are in the middle of the floor, and your poor partner's there going, whoa, like what the hell just happened? And it's not that his shoes or her shoes on the floor really truly meant that you needed to have a massive explosion to it. Really, it's, you know what, get over it. It's kind of inconsequential. The problem is it's gone on top of your tough day. It's gone on top of all the other things that you've dealt with, that you've masked, that you've kept inside, that you've kind of gone, no, it's all right, I can deal with this. And you keep going on. But then that one thing happens at the end and you have that big explosive meltdown. So that's trigger stacking, how we would experience it. And I think sometimes that's a really helpful explanation for people who have dogs that maybe don't react to everything on the street, because we get sometimes dogs that go, well, you got past that dog or you got past that person. So what's different? We can walk around like trying to like nitpick and work out what's different. Well, they were wearing a hat, or it was maybe that was a black dog. Was it a boy? Was it neutered? And we think that we try and like Miss Marple our way through this and try and work out what all the differences are, right? But the truth is that actually the dog was just all right, and they dealt with it internally. They weren't all right. They had an emotional response to it, but they dealt with it. And it was just when they'd done so many of those that they finally had that outburst. It wasn't that there was anything particularly different about that last one. It was just that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess, right? So that can be quite helpful. Sometimes when I'm talking about trigger stacking, I'll get people stop me and pause me and say, oh, is this like spoons? And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about the spoon theory. And you'll find that very few trainers truly talk, just easier crossover. But if it helps you understand your dog and understand yourself in relation, it is a helpful thing to do. So spoon theory is often used in, it started in human chronic health conditions. And it's the concept that you start the day with a certain number of spoons available to you, right? Every activity that you do requires you to spend some of your spoons on that. So for somebody who has a chronic health problem, perhaps they're dealing with chronic pain, they start out the day with a certain number of spoons. And it's worth noting here that everybody starts out with a different amount of spoons. We don't all have the same amount of spoons, right? And some days you don't have the same amount of spoons that you had the day before, right? So it's very dependent on the situation that's going on, where you are in the world, what you're dealing with in the world. And this is the same for our dogs as well. They don't all have the same amount of coping available to them. They all have different amounts, and different days look different for each dog too, right? So you've started the day, you've got a certain amount of spoons available to you to spend, and you need to exchange these spoons to do the activities of daily living, essentially. Maybe a shower costs you 2 spoons, you're down 2 spoons already, right? And then going to the shops costs you another certain amount of spoons. You can very quickly spend your spoons before you've even managed to finish your day. And that means that by the end of the day, you ain't got no more spoons to left. So somebody is asking you to deal with something or do something for you, you literally can't. You don't have any spoons left available to you, and you can't deal with that as well. And it's when people try and force themselves through that and try and keep doing activity despite not having any spoons left, that they go into full-on meltdown, or perhaps they just reach a place where they can't cope anymore and they go burnout, and that's no good. So spoons can be quite a helpful thing. And certainly I find a lot of humans like saying, I haven't got any spoons left for that. That feels like a really nice thing to be able to say, I've got no spoons left for that. And it's lovely when you can acknowledge that. I find it harder to apply to dogs because we're already dealing with a concept difference between my brain and another thing's brain. And also we can't really talk to them about what has a value. Like spoons have a different value, like a shower might take more of my spoons than it does of your spoons, etc. So it's harder to kind of apply that over to dogs a little bit. I think trigger stacking is sometimes a little cleaner. The one I like the best, though, is the bucket. And I like this for humans and for dogs. And so I often talk about my own personal bucket. I'll say my bucket's full. I need to go and sort it myself. Or I say to myself, I need dog time, which is an amusing thing because of course I'm human. But it's a really helpful tool. So The bucket, I've drawn you a crude picture, and tonight you're going to have to deal with me pausing to do some writing as well, but I'm sure we can deal with it. I've got a very lovely bucket here, right? The bucket theory is quite an interesting one because it takes account of more things for me. So what's really happening when we have a moment where we react to a trigger, or we see a trigger in the world, or something causes us to have an emotional response to it? What's really happening is our body is releasing hormones, right? It's releasing those hormones in response to the thing that we're seeing or experiencing. And there's lots of hormones that are released, but there's two that are quite important for us to know about. The first one is adrenaline. Now, adrenaline is a really good hormone. We definitely need it, right? And what it does is it makes our muscles move, right? It goes to our muscles and it makes them expand and contract and move. The only way to get adrenaline out of your body is to use it. You can't just sit there and wait for it to go out. It has to be used by your muscles, okay? And that's really important for us to know because it's the main thing that causes us that response that we're seeing from a behavioral perspective. So the dog that's lunging and barking or running away or spinning around in circles or doing a thing, it's using its adrenaline. So it's quite helpful, I think, when you see a dog do a thing, your brain goes, it's released adrenaline. I can see the adrenaline in the dog's body, right? If adrenaline is there, then cortisol is also there. They come as like a bundled pair, right? And cortisol we can't see. It's a very useful hormone. You and I have got it running through our bodies right now. If we didn't have it, we would literally be on the floor. Ain't no good. We need cortisol. It's a useful thing. But too much cortisol definitely can cause our body a problem, right? And what happens is we struggle to get rid of it quite so easily. So cortisol doesn't go quite so easily. Adrenaline's really quick. We use it, it's gone. It's got a half-life of like 2 minutes or something. You know, in like Holby City and stuff, when they start shoving adrenaline in bodies because they're doing compressions, they have to go in again, don't they? They usually have to do it 2 or 3 times. And that's because it gets used up so darn fast. And our dogs use it real darn fast when they lunge and bark and do all the things, right? But cortisol doesn't. Cortisol, if it's knocking around in our body and there's no other cortisol and no other stresses present, it goes up in pregnancy, can you tell? It goes probably within an hour. It drops by half in about an hour if there's no other cortisol present or being added to the situation. If, however, there is already a layer of cortisol in there or more is getting added, it can take up to 72 hours. That's 3 days for cortisol to exit our body, right? Now, as cortisol builds, it's kind of all right until it reaches the level where it's not all right anymore. And what we start seeing is an exaggerated stress response to a really pretty low stressor. So something that you or I or your dog could kind of normally cope with, they can't cope with anymore. They have this exacerbated response to stuff that it kind of seems a little bit innocuous almost. Like maybe previously, think back a couple of months or perhaps a couple of years, and you think, well, my dog didn't used to bark at the door, or they didn't used to bark at that person, or they didn't used to bark at people at all. They only barked at dogs and now they bark at both, right? Or maybe they only barked at every other dog and now they bark at every dog. So there's always this like, as there's more cortisol in their body, they have bigger and more responses to stuff that previously they could have coped with before. And the bucket is a really useful way of thinking about this. So let's take that example that we talked about before for trigger stacking, right? And we talk about the dog going through the day being trigger stacked. So your dog's at home, maybe postman comes round, rings on the doorbell. Can we see red on the thing? Yeah, we can see red. All right, there, can't we? So it comes round and rings on the doorbell. That's a trigger for our dog. It barked, it went to the door, it did a thing. We saw the adrenaline, didn't we? We saw it move and respond. So we know that there was cortisol released, and cortisol goes into our bucket. So, you know full well that actually it's more than one person comes to our door every day. And it's never just the postman, is it? Because Amazon comes as well with that thing that we desperately needed at midnight last night. And then DPD comes with our latest clothes from wherever it is or whatever it is. And then somebody randomly slams a car door outside as well, don't they? So there's all these triggers happening at home before we've even gone anywhere. Our dog's been barking all morning. My lad's at this all morning sometimes. And every time he hears a car turning in the bloody street, he's like, yeah, I'm off. And he doesn't do a big one, Bob. He does the but he did a thing, right? So he had a dose of cortisol. It might be a smaller dose of cortisol, but he did a thing. And I know that there was some cortisol being released from that little underneath his breath. Okay. And then we go out for our morning walk, right? And my dog might see another dog. Well, the seeing a dog might be a bigger dose of cortisol, mightn't it? Yeah. We might have a bigger response to that. So we might have more cortisol going in. And maybe they see another dog. I mean, realistically, how many dogs do they see on a walk when they're out and about? How many times do they have these like bigger reactions that we're seeing? 2 times on a walk, 3 times on a walk? That's pretty reasonable for most of our clients that come through to us. They'll say to us, yeah, they'll do it 2 or 3 times on a walk. We're not even halfway through the day yet. You can see what's happening here, right? So then we come home, we maybe have somebody else come round or whatever. But here, do you remember earlier? I said it takes 72 hours. That's 3 days. I've started this drawing on an empty bucket. But the truth is, that's 2 days ago. That's yesterday. This is where you started your day. Yeah, we're already starting on a layer of cortisol that's still in our body, still trying to get out. And so what happens is really quickly, we start to overflow, and that bucket will spill out and overflow. And that's where we see that exaggerated stress response, right? And exaggerated stress responses, they're stress responses. That's all they are, really. It's just that we kind of think in our human heads, that's a bit much, isn't it? That's what I mean by an exaggerated response, right? But the truth is that can be anything. Responses can look like barking. They can look like lunging. They can look like running away. They can look like spinning in circles. Some dogs, and remember, I've done negative examples here just because most people have that kind of world, and most people who are looking to change their dog's behavior are coming at this because they bark at other dogs on the street and it's not a nice thing, right? But we also have lots of teenage dogs who have lots of fun reactions to things that they're seeing. That ball that got thrown, that exciting person that they met, they're all the same. Because the dog did a physical response to it, you saw it with your eyes, you saw that adrenaline going. They also had that layer of cortisol coming through. They're paired, right? They're always paired. So you might see dogs doing things that we think are friendly but look a bit weird. So essentially, we get what we call a fawn response. We know fight or flight very well. Of course we do. But there's also a fawn response. So a fawn response is a bit like flirting, right? They might go in and they look a little bit silly. And these dogs might look like they're playing. They look wiggly and they go into play. And you might get a play bow, but you get like a weird play bow. And they kind of go in on a bit of a weird, like their bottom might be straight, but their shoulders might be twisted. And it's a little bit of a like, I'm playing, I think. That's the kind of vibe that they're giving off. They might do. You don't see this as the owner in general because you'll tend to be behind the dog. If you're walking your dog tends to be in front of you. And if they go off to interact with the other dog and they do the fawn response, we tend to just see the play bow. We tend to just see the bottom in the air. But actually, if you look carefully, the tail doesn't tend to wag as freely as it does in a loose play. I tend to find it a little stiffer. That's a generalization, of course. I tend to find that shoulder drops down a little bit more. But what you often see from the front that you don't see from the back is that there's that weird tightness. You remember we talked before about that tightness in the mouth that has held back here. That tightness is often present. We often have a little bit of waylie going on. And of course, we don't see that from the bottom end, do we? But the dog in front is kind of going, what the bloody hell are you doing? Because you look a bit weird, love. And it's that kind of like, I'm really weird and busy right now, and I think I want to play, but I don't know that I really do want to play. And so they give off really weird play signals. That would be how I would describe it before. You also get freeze. Freeze is a common one. We often get people ring us saying, my dog just stands still, or pancakes in the street and they just drop down onto their belly and they can't be moved until the thing's gone, right? A freeze response, that's also part of this fight, flight, fawn, freeze, and fornicate. We don't need to go into that one. You know what that means, don't you? I'm not going to do any demos of that one. But those things are stress responses, and they're really big, obvious stress responses. You might notice smaller stress responses, particularly now that we've been talking about our behaviors and our red, our ambers, and our green type layers and behaviors as well, because we're now starting to be a little bit more dialed into those little things that they're doing, those little ear flicks that they do, those little moments will also be responses to the triggers. When the bucket fills over, we get these big stress responses. It also means that whenever they do those things, guess what? It's paying back into the bucket, isn't it? So basically, it becomes a bit of a circle. They have the stress response, they have the cortisol release, which means that they're more likely to have a stress response, which means that they release cortisol, which means they're more likely, and it just goes round and round and round. Now, good news. Actually, before I go into the good news, we're just going to recap what goes into the bucket. So things that go into the bucket, we've already talked about negative things, haven't we? Sad things. My dog is scared of the postman. My dog is worried by person on the street. Negative stressors pay into the bucket. They are things that would cause our dog to have a moment. Exciting things also pay into the bucket. So doggies who chase balls over and over and over and over again, that's really going to fill that bucket up real quick. Balls are great, but I want a dog to have fun, but I also want to make sure that they're not having big fun all the time, because I don't really want to be filling this bucket up, right? The other thing that we absolutely have to really seriously take into consideration is pain. So cortisol is naturally released as part of our body's defense mechanism against illness and against pain. If our dog is in any pain, anywhere, in any part of their body, they are already releasing cortisol. I do not need extra cortisol coming into this dog's body, thank you very much. We find that in about 90% of cases, honest to God, it is a huge number of dogs that come to us with reactivity issues, that they want to work on all these stress responses. They have got something weird going on with them that hasn't necessarily been picked up on yet. Absolutely take your dog to the vets. There's maybe a weird gait going on. Maybe they've got a weird dodgy hip that we haven't picked up on yet. Maybe there's something else underlying. Something, anything. It's always worth a vet check when we've got dogs that are having big reactions to things. Because if I sort out everything else that I'm doing, I don't necessarily sort out the problem, because I haven't got rid of the pain in the first place. My dog's arthritic. I can always tell when he's more in pain than usual, because he does weirder stuff. One of his stress responses is humping. We talked about fornication. Humping is his stress response, right? So if he starts humping and I know he's done everything else all right, I suspect he's in pain, and the pain is paying into the bucket. So I cannot stress enough to get your dog checked out. Weird little blippy illnesses as well. If your dog's got the squits one day, chances are they're going to be more reactive for the next couple of days, because the squits will automatically produce a cortisol response in your dog. So if they've eaten something dodgy, they're going to have a little bit more cortisol in their body. If they get neutered or spayed, or they rip a dew claw off, they're going to have more cortisol going through their body. So we just have to be aware of those moments in time where they're going to do an increase, but also that one that we maybe don't know about that's a bit more innocuous. So sad things can pay in, happy things can pay in, super exciting things can pay in, and pain and illness pays in as well. So what gets rid of it though? Because if it's only there for 3 days, it's clearly not going up forever and ever and ever, is it? It's clearly somehow able to decrease itself, isn't it? So how is it getting out, right? And what I'd say is, the best way to think of it is, it's like a leaky bucket. It's always leaking a little bit. And there's things that we can do to help our dogs empty that bucket quicker, right? So when the bucket is getting filled up, it's using one of the nervous systems. There's 2 main nervous systems in our body: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. You don't really need to remember which one's which, but there's an easy way to do it. The sympathetic nervous system, the one that's feeling sympathetic to your plight as such, that's the one that switches on when you're out and about in the world and have that fight, flight, freeze reaction, right? The sympathetic nervous system goes, I've got you, fight or flight, coming right up for you. It's sympathetic, switches on and helps you out. That's the one that releases the cortisol for you. Your parasympathetic nervous system, that's the one that switches on in your rest and relaxed state. That's the one that switches on when you go in the bath with a glass of wine and goes, oh, thank God. Yes, parasympathetic nervous system comes on, right? They cannot be on at the same time. It's one or the other. They're like a light switch, on or off. They are not on at the same time. So obviously, if we want to reduce the amount of cortisol going in, we need that sympathetic nervous system to shut up for a little bit, don't we? And we need this parasympathetic nervous system to switch on a little bit more, right? Best way to do that: sleep. Sleep. You cannot be having a fight, flight, fawn response if you are sleeping, can you? You are absolutely, your parasympathetic nervous system is switched on. Dependent on the age of your dog needs a whole ton of sleep. And in fact, so much so, we are dedicating an entire session to sleep. But essentially, if you've got an adult dog, aim for 16 to 18 hours of sleep a day. 16 hours of sleep a day. It's a lot more than you think it is. That is your kind of like starting point. If your dog is not getting enough sleep, they don't have enough opportunity to get rid of that cortisol in their body. They're just going to wound themselves up tighter and tighter and tighter. Sleep is so important. People who work from home, or people who leave their dogs at home while they go to the office, they often say to me, I feel so guilty. They've been doing nothing all day. Good. Let them sleep. Sleeping dogs lie. They need it. They need to sleep. Let them get themselves sorted so that when you do come home, you do have time for them. It's good quality time that you're both enjoying spending together, not stressed out time because I haven't had enough sleep. Sleep is super important. The other thing that they need is safety. You guys are pretty good at providing safety for them in general. The only time I would say that we need to look at is the dog's opinion of whether the house is safe, the same as mine, is how many times are they barking at stuff when they're at home? How many times are they having the moment at home, right? If they're doing that every time somebody drives past or knocks on the door, maybe we don't have the same opinion of how safe this house is. Do you know what I mean? They're probably having more moments than we would like them having a truly safe environment. So we might need to look at how do we help you stop reacting to those things outside. Perhaps that's training, perhaps that's us pairing it with something good and trying to flip reverse your opinion of what's going on out there. Maybe it's something as simple as putting them in a different room during the course of the day so they're further away from the street. Maybe it's about putting the telly on or the radio on so it can mask some of those noises. If you're doing that, my recommendation is generally to put on talky, laughy shows. Everybody has different opinions. Some people do like and they do find that classical music works for them, but I find that classical music becomes known, whereas talky, laughy shows, Big Bang Theory, Friends, sports programs on the radio thing, what tends to happen there is they're unpredictable. They do the talky laughy, and the dog can't predict what's coming, and so it masks the sounds of people outside because it goes up and down in volume and it's kind of explosive and they're not. So I tend to find they work a little bit better. But yeah, trying to help your dog. Perhaps you might need to close the curtains or put some of that like sticky barrier up on the windows so that they can't see out quite so much. It's short-term solutions while we're looking for the long-term stuff here to help them get over that. And the other thing is what we call dog time. Dog time is that active rest and relaxation period where the dog is enjoying themselves. And I know that enjoying things turns on the sympathetic nervous system, but enjoying themselves calmly and relaxed. And we're looking for a very green dog in this area, certainly no ambers or red behaviors in here. And this is something that the dog tells you that they like doing. We don't always agree that it's a good thing to do. And certainly people ring me to correct these problems. So the dog that likes to shred stuff, the dog that likes to dig in the garden, the dog that likes to maybe run around the house with the contraband that they've nicked. What we want to do is we want to find an outlet that they're allowed to do the thing that they're trying to do. So whenever our dog is doing something naughty, like digging in the garden or shredding our post, what they're actually doing is trying to regulate their own nervous system. They're saying, I feel weird, I feel fizzy, I want to feel better. What makes me feel better? Shredding shit. That makes me feel better. And they'll go and find a thing to do to make themselves feel better, right? We tend to like our post. We certainly like our rugs because we went to work to earn the money to go to the shop to give them the money to come back with the rug, right? It's, capitalism at its finest. We like that rug and we prefer them to not eat that rug. So we need to find them a solution that we are okay with them doing. So cheap toys from the charity shop, do not go spending loads of money on it. And oh my God, these toys are meant to not be destroyed. How mean is that? That poor doggy needs to destroy the thing. It wants to destroy the thing to feel better. And we're going, no, go buy the cheap ones from the charity shop. Check they ain't got the balls in them and check they've got appropriate eyes. Of course, you don't want them to be having something that is actually going to cause them an injury, do you? And if your dog eats the stuffing, obviously supervise them. There's lots of nuances here and there, but essentially get them stuff that they're allowed to shred. If they're a digger, find them a space that you're okay with them digging in. So I've had people buy sand pits for kids and put them in their gardens, and that's a great place. I've had people just say, do you know what, I don't care about that particular border. That can be their border. I've also had people say, I don't really like the ones who, I don't really like it when they go into the sand because it tracks into my house. So they've got like pea gravel and put that into a bucket and they've been allowed to dig in the pea gravel because it tracks in less. It doesn't matter. Just find a solution that you go, my dog likes doing this and this is a way that I'm happy for them to do it. Sniffing, licking, chewing, digging, shredding, they're your general top 5 things that you want to do. And we would class that as enrichment quite often, but it's dog time here essentially, isn't it, to help empty that bucket. Okay, so things paying, good stuff, bad stuff, pain, always look for the pain, especially if something's new. Pays in, goes in over 3 days, and we see these exaggerated responses. Some days you will see more responses than others because some days you've had loads of this going on and none of this. Sometimes you've had a really lovely calm weekend and you've had loads of this going on and not a right lot of this. So this was able to empty. And we go back to this idea of trigger stacking, that they did quite well, and then they couldn't do so well anymore because they were building up on perhaps an emptier base there, yeah? So Nice little ways to have a little look at it, and nice ways to start helping your dog. Whenever we're doing a consultation with clients, we always look at the bucket first. What's paying into your dog's bucket? Write it down at the top. Draw yourself a flipping bucket. What's paying into your dog's bucket? Be really specific. What do they bark at? What do they react to? What do they find interesting? What do they find hard? What pays into your dog's bucket? Write the good stuff and write the bad stuff, and remember to write if there's any pain. And then what do they do to try and empty their own bucket? What do they like doing? How can you facilitate more of that? And then how much sleep are they getting, and try and increase that amount of sleep. And that'll be your starting point there. Okay. 20 past. I'm going to call it a day there. I'm pretty sure I saw a question pop up. We don't have a question host today, so I'm just going to see if I can find it. Here we go in the chat. Do you have any tips for dogs with separation anxiety to reduce the level of cortisol? Many of my client dogs are terrible at home alone, lockdown puppies. Yeah, do you know what? Separation anxiety is flipping such a big deal, isn't it? It's sad because it's a really exaggerated response to stuff, isn't it? It's a really horrible thing. What I would say is, I personally, your starting point is to not expose them to the thing that they find stressful, right? Knock that on the head as much as you can. And yes, that means not leaving your dog alone. And that is a really hard thing to do. But if you truly want to get over separation anxiety, that has to be your starting place. Not leaving the dog alone. They have to know that they are safe, and they have to know that you are there with them. We had this with Bob when he was really little. I've got a myriad of Bob sitters. I could not go anywhere without dropping Bob off somewhere. It was like having a child. I had to take him to his Bob sitter everywhere I went. So, you know, friends and family would step in and help out from it, or I'd have people come to mine and look after him until we could work on it. And that truly is level 0, not exposing them to the thing that puts the cortisol into their body. And then, of course, working on emptying that bucket. And then it's really gentle, planned, carefully thought through process. We don't do separation anxiety because it is so very niche. If you want to do separation anxiety, get in touch and I can recommend somebody who does. But it is very niche because it's such a planned process. But yeah, absolute starting point is stop exposing them to the stressor as much as you possibly can do. But yeah, okay. I saw another one come through. Do things like licking mats. Licking mats are brilliant. Yeah, licking mats are flipping fantastic. So licking is definitely a thing that they like doing. Some dogs, watch them when they're doing it. If your dog seems to be having a nice time, then yes, it's probably emptying the bucket. If your dog's getting really fucking wound up with it, then it's probably not emptying their bucket, is it? It's probably adding into their bucket. So different dogs have different responses. And this is where you as an owner need to get really nuanced with stuff, and also spend all of your hard-earned money in the shops trying to find all the different things that you like. Amazon's a great place. You fall down a rabbit hole when you type in enrichment toys in Amazon, and you end up with all of it under. I've got it all under my bed because I'm currently not in my own house at the minute. I'm staying at my mum, and I've just got like boxes of enrichment toys under my bed. But yeah, food toys can be very enriching, but they can also verge on the side of frustration. So we just need to make sure that they're not getting frustrated with the thing that's ideally meant to be helping calm them. But they're a really good starting place. We've actually got a book on enrichment, a stuffable dog toys book. I'll try and send it through to you. Because we talk about how to get dogs used to those toys without getting frustrated with them, and like building them up on it, and what to put in it and what to put on it in terms of nutrition and stuff as well. So I'll see if I can dig that out for you. But yeah, perfect, team. Thank you so much for your time this evening. That was a good session. The bucket is one that we use so very frequently. I think next week is sleep, so we can kind of touch on that a little bit more, and I shall look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much, guys. See you later.